Her father sent her to the wilderness as a disgrace, but the mountain man saw the woman no one else did. Lady Eleanor Whitmore had spent her entire life hearing people discuss her body as though she were not standing in the room. At banquets, noblewomen covered their smiles with jeweled fans. Young gentlemen bowed politely, then laughed when they thought she could no longer hear them. Even her own father rarely called her by name. To the Duke of Whitmore, Eleanor was simply his greatest disappointment. But on the coldest morning of winter, he decided that humiliation was no longer enough. He would send her away, not to a distant relative, not to a convent, but to a feared mountain man who lived beyond the northern frontier, a man the townspeople called a savage. The Duke believed Eleanor would spend the rest of her life regretting that she had ever embarrassed his family. What he did not know was that the mountain man would become the first person to look at Eleanor and see something other than her size. And when the Duke finally came to take her back, he would discover that the daughter he had discarded no longer needed his name, his fortune, or his permission to live. The carriage stopped so suddenly that Eleanor's shoulder struck the wooden wall. Outside, the wind howled through the pine trees. Her maid, Clara, pulled the curtain aside and stared at the snow-covered wilderness. "There is no house," Clara whispered. Eleanor looked through the window. The road had disappeared beneath a sheet of white. Dark mountains rose on every side, their peaks hidden behind heavy clouds. Several armed guards stood beside the carriage, stamping their boots to keep warm. Captain Hale opened the door. "This is where we leave you, my lady." Eleanor stared at him. "Leave me? The horses cannot continue through the pass. My father ordered you to take me to Mr. Grayson's home." Captain Hale avoided her eyes. "We were told that he would meet us here." Eleanor looked toward the endless forest. There was no sign of anyone. Only snow, trees, and silence. Clara grabbed Eleanor's hand. "You cannot leave her here. She will freeze." Captain Hale's jaw tightened. "I have my orders." He placed a leather bag on the ground. Inside were 2 dresses, a blanket, a small amount of food, and a letter bearing the Duke's seal. Then he climbed back into the carriage. Clara tried to follow Eleanor, but Captain Hale blocked her. "The maid returns with us." "No," Eleanor said. "She stays with me. Your father was clear." Clara began crying. "My lady, please." Eleanor's heart pounded, but she forced herself to stand straight. "Go, Clara. I cannot abandon you. You have a younger brother depending on your wages. If you disobey my father, he will dismiss you and make certain that no other household employs you." Clara shook her head. Eleanor squeezed her hand. "This is not your fault." Captain Hale pulled Clara into the carriage. The door closed. Moments later, the horses turned around. Eleanor watched until the carriage disappeared into the falling snow. For the first time in her 27 years, she was completely alone. She opened her father's letter. "Eleanor, your behavior at Lord Pembroke's winter banquet was the final humiliation. You rejected a marriage proposal that would have benefited this family. You embarrassed the gentleman publicly, and you accused him of seeking only your inheritance. Since you believe yourself capable of making decisions without my guidance, you will now live with the consequences. Silas Grayson once saved my life during the border war. I promised him a reward. He requested land and a wife capable of managing a household. I have given him both. You will obey him as your husband. Do not return." Eleanor read the final line 3 times. Do not return. Lord Pembroke had not proposed because he loved her. He had whispered the truth when they were alone. He intended to use her inheritance to pay his gambling debts. Once married, Eleanor would be hidden at one of his country estates, so that he would not have to look at her. When she refused, he grabbed her wrist and called her an ungrateful animal. Eleanor slapped him. Her father had apologized to Lord Pembroke before asking whether the slap had damaged his face. Now she understood her punishment. Her father had not merely sent her away. He had traded her to settle an old debt. The wind grew stronger. Eleanor wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and began walking toward the trees. She had taken fewer than 20 steps when her boot slipped. She fell hard into the snow. Pain shot through her ankle. For several minutes, she could not move. Then she heard a sound between the trees. A branch snapped. Eleanor reached for the small knife hidden inside her sleeve. A shadow moved through the snowfall. The man who emerged was taller than anyone Eleanor had ever seen. He wore a heavy bearskin coat, worn leather boots, and a rifle across his back. A dark beard covered most of his face, and a scar ran from his left temple to his cheek. This had to be Silas Grayson. He stopped several feet away. His eyes moved from Eleanor to the abandoned bag, then toward the carriage tracks. "Did they leave you here alone?" His voice was deep, but surprisingly calm. Eleanor tightened her grip on the knife. "You are Mr. Grayson." "I am. My father said you would meet us. I was told they would arrive tomorrow." Silas looked at her ankle. "Can you stand?" "I believe so." She tried. The moment she placed weight on her foot, her leg collapsed. Silas stepped forward, but Eleanor raised the knife. "Do not touch me." He stopped immediately. "All right?" His lack of anger confused her. Most men would have laughed or taken the weapon away. Silas removed his rifle and placed it on the ground. Then he held out both empty hands. "You can remain here and freeze, or I can carry you to my cabin. Those are the choices the storm has given us. I do not know you. That makes two of us. My father says I am to become your wife." Silas's expression changed. He looked toward the carriage tracks again. "He did not tell you?" "Tell me what?" Silas was silent for a moment. "I asked the Duke to help me find a housekeeper." Eleanor felt as though the cold had entered her chest. "A housekeeper?" "I never requested a wife." The truth was somehow more humiliating than her father's letter. He had lied to both of them. "I see." Silas picked up his rifle. "No, I do not think you do." He removed his coat and placed it around Eleanor's shoulders. "I owe your father nothing, and you owe me even less." Before she could object, he lifted her carefully into his arms. Eleanor's entire body became rigid. Silas adjusted his grip, but made no comment about her weight. He simply carried her into the forest. The journey took nearly an hour. Not once did he complain. Not once did he stop to catch his breath. Eventually, a cabin appeared between the trees. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, and warm light shone through two small windows. A barn stood nearby, along with a woodshed and a fenced enclosure containing 3 goats. Silas carried Eleanor inside. The cabin was plain but clean. A fire burned in the hearth. Dried herbs hung from the ceiling, and several shelves were filled with books. Silas placed Eleanor in a wooden chair. "I need to examine your ankle." Eleanor hesitated before lifting the edge of her dress. Her ankle was already swollen. Silas knelt in front of her and gently removed her boot. She expected him to stare at her thick calf. He did not. His attention remained on the injury. "It is sprained, not broken." "How can you be certain?" "I treated wounded men for 4 years during the war." He wrapped her ankle with a strip of clean cloth. "You will need to rest for several days. And after that? After that, you may decide where you wish to go." Eleanor laughed bitterly. "My father has forbidden me from returning." "Your father is not king of the mountains. You do not understand. I have no money that he cannot control. No home, no relatives willing to oppose him." Silas stood. "Then you may stay here until you have another choice." "As your housekeeper? As a guest?" Eleanor searched his face for mockery. There was none. And what will you expect in return? Nothing. No man offers something for nothing. Silas looked at the scarred wooden table between them. Perhaps that is true where you come from. He added another log to the fire. But you are not there anymore. That evening, Silas prepared rabbit stew. Eleanor ate quietly, waiting for him to ask about her father, her inheritance, or the proposed marriage. He asked none of those things. Instead, he told her where to find water, how to secure the door, and what to do if she heard wolves during the night. When the meal was finished, he carried a blanket toward the door. Where are you going? The barn. This is your home. And you are injured. There is another chair. You need the bed more than I do. Eleanor stared at him. You would sleep in a barn because I am here? I have slept in worse places. Silas opened the door. Before leaving, he placed her small knife on the table beside the bed. You dropped this in the snow. The door closed behind him. Eleanor touched the handle of the knife. He could have kept it. He could have laughed at her fear. Instead, he had returned the only weapon she possessed and left her alone in his home. That night, Eleanor cried without making a sound. She did not cry because her father had rejected her. She had survived his rejection for years. She cried because a stranger had shown her more consideration in a few hours than her own family had shown her in a lifetime. Over the following days, Silas maintained his distance. Each morning, he entered only after knocking. He brought food, changed the bandage around Eleanor's ankle, and left again to hunt or cut wood. On the fourth day, Eleanor attempted to prepare breakfast. When Silas entered, smoke filled the cabin. A blackened pan sat on the stove. Eleanor stood beside it, with a wooden spoon in her hand. I may have destroyed your breakfast. Silas opened the window. And perhaps the pan. I warned you that I was raised by servants. You did not warn me that you considered fire an enemy to be defeated. For a moment, Eleanor thought he was insulting her. Then, she noticed the corner of his mouth rising. He was teasing her. No one had ever teased her without cruelty. I was trying to repay your kindness, she said. You do not owe me repayment. I cannot spend my life sitting beside your fire. Your ankle is still healing. My hands are not injured. Silas studied her. Can you read? Eleanor almost laughed. I speak French and Italian. I understand Latin. I kept my father's household accounts for 6 years, though he allowed everyone to believe his steward did the work. Silas pointed toward a wooden chest near the wall. Then perhaps you can help me with those. Inside the chest were dozens of papers. Land records, trading receipts, letters from merchants, lists of supplies. Silas knew how to read, but his spelling was poor, and his accounts were in complete disorder. Eleanor spent the afternoon organizing everything. By sunset, she had discovered that 2 merchants in the nearest town had been underpaying Silas for animal hides. You have lost nearly $40 this season. Silas stared at the figures. Are you certain? Completely. That explains why Mr. Turner smiles every time he sees me. Eleanor created a proper ledger. The next week, she wrote letters demanding payment. Both merchants quickly sent the missing money. Silas placed half of it on the table in front of Eleanor. What is this? Your share. I only wrote 2 letters. You recovered money I would never have known was missing. I cannot accept it. You performed work. Work deserves payment. The words unsettled her. At her father's estate, Eleanor had managed servants, reviewed purchases, planned banquets, and corrected financial errors. Her father had called it her duty. Silas called it work, and he paid her for it. As winter deepened, Eleanor became part of the cabin's daily rhythm. She learned to make bread. The first loaf was as hard as stone. Silas ate 2 slices without complaint. The second loaf was softer. The third filled the cabin with such a rich smell that Silas returned from the woods early. Eleanor learned to milk goats, preserve vegetables, repair clothes, and recognize approaching storms by the movement of clouds. Silas learned that Eleanor preferred tea to coffee, hated complete silence while working, and could remember every number she had ever seen. At night, they sat on opposite sides of the fire. Silas carved pieces of wood, while Eleanor read aloud. Sometimes she read adventure stories, sometimes poetry. Silas always pretended not to enjoy the poetry, but Eleanor noticed that he stopped carving whenever she reached a beautiful passage. One evening, she closed the book. "Why do you live here alone?" Silas continued carving. "The mountain is quiet." "That is not an answer. It is the answer I have." Eleanor waited. Eventually, Silas placed the piece of wood on the table. "My younger brother died during the war. I am sorry. I promised our mother that I would protect him. I failed. You were both soldiers. You could not control everything that happened. He was 17. Silas stared into the fire. "I convinced him to enlist with me. I told him we would return as heroes. What happened? He was wounded during a retreat. The captain ordered us to leave the injured behind." Eleanor's voice softened. "And you obeyed?" "No." Silas touched the scar on his face. "I carried him for 6 miles. He died before sunrise." The cabin became silent. When I returned home, my mother could not look at me without seeing him, so I left. Eleanor understood that kind of silence. The silence of being blamed for a wound you had not created. "My mother died when I was 9, she said. Silas looked at her. "After that, my father began arranging my life as though I were another piece of furniture in his house. He chose my clothes, my friends, even the amount of food placed on my plate." She smiled without humor. "When restricting my meals did not make me thin, he decided I lacked discipline. You were a child." He said that was no excuse. Silas's expression hardened. "Your father is a fool." Eleanor blinked. No one had ever spoken about the Duke of Whitmore that way. Then she began laughing. She laughed until tears filled her eyes. Silas watched her, confused. "I apologize," Eleanor said. "It is simply the first honest description of him I have ever heard." By the time spring arrived, Eleanor's dresses had become worn from daily work. She no longer cared. Her cheeks were frequently pink from the cold. Her hands had roughened, and several strands of hair always escaped her braid. She had not transformed into the delicate beauty her father had demanded. But something else had changed. She moved without trying to make herself smaller. She spoke without apologizing, before every sentence. And when she laughed, the sound filled the entire cabin. One afternoon, Silas returned from town with blue fabric. Eleanor unfolded it across the table. "What is this for?" "Your dresses are falling apart. You purchased fabric for me? You earned it. I have money of my own. You are saving that. For what? For whatever future you choose." Eleanor looked at him carefully. "Do you still expect me to leave?" Silas's hands became still. "I expect you to decide." "And what would you decide?" His gaze met hers. "That is not my right." Eleanor felt disappointment settle inside her. She had begun imagining that Silas might ask her to stay. Not because of her father's agreement, not because he needed a housekeeper, because he wanted her. But Silas never crossed the invisible boundary between them. He treated her with respect, protected her from danger, and listened to every word she spoke. Yet he never touched her unless necessary. He never mentioned marriage. Eleanor wondered whether his kindness had allowed her to imagine feelings that were not there. 3 weeks later, a group of riders appeared on the southern trail. Silas saw them first. He entered the cabin and reached for his rifle. "Stay inside." Eleanor looked through the window. At the front of the group rode Captain Hale. Behind him was Lord Pembroke. Eleanor's blood turned cold. Pembroke dismounted in a polished coat, unsuitable for mountain travel. "My dear Eleanor." He opened his arms as though greeting a beloved relative. Eleanor remained in the doorway. "What are you doing here?" "Correcting a terrible misunderstanding." Silas stepped between them. Pembroke looked him up and down with disgust. "You must be Grayson." "I must. I have come for Lady Eleanor. She is standing in front of you. You may ask her whether she wishes to go." Pembroke smiled. "This is a family matter." "No," Eleanor said. "It is my matter." Pembroke's smile disappeared. He approached her and lowered his voice. "Your father is dying." Eleanor's heart faltered. "What happened?" "His heart has weakened. The physicians believe he has only weeks." Despite everything, the news struck her painfully. Pembroke continued. "He regrets sending you away. He wants you home." "Why did he send you?" "Because our engagement is to be restored." "There was never an engagement." "There will be now." Silas's hand tightened around his rifle. Pembroke glanced at him. "The Duke has reconsidered your inheritance. Upon your marriage, the Whitmore estate will pass jointly to us." There it was. The truth. Pembroke had not crossed the frontier because Eleanor's father was dying. He had come because the inheritance was no longer certain. "I will visit my father," Eleanor said, "but I will not marry you." Pembroke moved closer. "You have been living alone with this man for months. Do you understand what society will say? I no longer care." "You should. Your reputation is destroyed." Silas stepped forward. Pembroke's guards raised their weapons. Eleanor placed herself between them. "No one will fire." She turned to Silas. "I must see my father." Silas's face revealed nothing. "I understand." A part of Eleanor wanted him to ask her not to go. He did not. "Will you come with me?" she asked. Pembroke objected immediately. "That is impossible." Eleanor ignored him. Silas looked toward the distant mountains. "I do not belong in your father's world." "Neither do I." Silas met her eyes. For a moment, she believed he might agree. Then he shook his head. "This is something you must face without me." Eleanor felt as though a door had closed between them. She packed that evening. Before dawn, she found Silas standing beside the barn. "I left the account books in order," she said. He nodded. "The merchants know the new prices." "Good." "I also prepared enough preserved food for several weeks." "You did not have to." "I know." Neither of them said what mattered. Finally, Silas handed her a small wooden carving. It was a bird with open wings. "I made this for you." Eleanor ran her thumb over the smooth wood. "It is beautiful." "It is a hawk. They fly farther than most birds, but they always remember where the mountains are." Her throat tightened. "Is that your way of asking me to return?" Silas looked at her with a sadness she had never seen before. "It is my way of saying you are free." Eleanor wanted to tell him that freedom meant little if she could not share it with him. But the words remained trapped inside her. She climbed into the carriage. Silas stood beside the trail as it carried her away. Whitmore Hall looked exactly as Eleanor remembered. Grand. Cold. Perfectly arranged. Servants stared as she entered wearing a plain blue dress and mountain boots. Her father lay in the room where he had once conducted business. The Duke appeared smaller than before. His skin was pale, and each breath seemed difficult. He dismissed the servants. For several minutes, father and daughter looked at one another. "You have changed," he said. "So have you." His eyes moved over her dress. "That man did not provide suitable clothing? I made this dress myself." "You?" "Yes." The Duke seemed almost offended by the idea. "Pembroke tells me you have become stubborn." "I was always stubborn. I simply stopped hiding it." Her father attempted to sit straighter. I made a mistake sending you there. You made several. I was angry. You traded me to a stranger. I believed Grayson had requested a wife. He requested a housekeeper. You lied to both of us. The Duke looked away. Eleanor placed the wooden hawk on the table beside him. Why did you bring me back? You are my only surviving child. The estate requires an heir. You mean Lord Pembroke requires my inheritance. He is from a respected family. He is cruel, dishonest, and deeply in debt. Marriage is not a romantic story, Eleanor. It is an arrangement. Then arrange your own marriage to him. The Duke's eyes widened. Months earlier, Eleanor would have trembled after speaking such words. Now she felt calm. Her father began coughing. Eleanor poured him water and waited until the attack passed. When he recovered, his voice was weaker. No one else will marry you. Eleanor looked at him. There it was, the weapon he had used throughout her life. The belief that being unwanted was the worst fate a woman could suffer. I would rather live alone than spend one day with a man who considers me an embarrassment. You will lose everything. I built a life with nothing. You lived in a cabin. I lived in a home. The Duke closed his eyes. You are truly refusing. Yes. Then leave. Eleanor picked up the wooden hawk. Her father spoke again before she reached the door. You will receive no inheritance. She looked back at him. I did not return for your money. What did you return for? Eleanor considered the question. I suppose a part of me hoped you would finally say that what you did was wrong. The Duke's face remained hard. I did what I believed was necessary. Eleanor nodded slowly. Then I have my answer. Pembroke waited in the entrance hall. When Eleanor announced that the marriage would not occur, his expression became dangerous. You think the mountain man loves you. Eleanor continued toward the door. Pembroke grabbed her arm. He tolerated you because your father paid him. Eleanor turned. My father did not pay him. Did Grayson tell you that? Pembroke smiled. The northern land surrounding his cabin belonged to your father. The Duke promised to transfer it in exchange for keeping you away from respectable society. Eleanor's confidence wavered. Pembroke saw it. You were not his guest. You were his payment. She pulled her arm away. I do not believe you. Ask Captain Hale. He carried the deed himself. Captain Hale stood near the door. His silence confirmed everything. Eleanor felt sick. Silas had told her she owed him nothing. Had that been another lie? She left Whitmore Hall and rode toward the village alone. That evening, a violent storm broke over the countryside. Eleanor found shelter at a small inn. She intended to return north the following morning, confront Silas, and learn the truth. But before sunrise, Captain Hale arrived. Lady Eleanor, you must come quickly. What happened? Lord Pembroke left the estate during the night. He took 12 armed men with him. Where is he going? Captain Hale hesitated. To Mr. Grayson's land. Pembroke possessed a copy of the Duke's original agreement. If Eleanor refused the marriage, he intended to claim that Silas had kidnapped and dishonored her. Then he would seize the northern property as compensation for the Whitmore family's broken arrangement. Eleanor rode harder than she had ever ridden before. By the time she reached the mountain pass, smoke was rising beyond the trees. Silas's barn was burning. 2 armed men lay injured in the snow. Silas stood near the cabin with blood running from his forehead. Pembroke's men surrounded him. Pembroke held a pistol. I knew she would return eventually, he said when he saw Eleanor. Some creatures always return to the person who feeds them. Eleanor dismounted. Call off your men. Pembroke laughed. You no longer give orders. He raised the pistol toward Silas. Eleanor stepped directly into his path. If you fire, you will have to shoot me first. Silas's voice was sharp. Eleanor, move. No. Pembroke stared at her. You would die for him? Eleanor looked at Silas. His face was bruised. His coat was torn. But even surrounded, he was watching her, rather than the weapons aimed at him. Yes, she said. I would. Silas's expression broke. Eleanor, she turned to Pembroke, and you will gain nothing by killing either of us. She removed a folded document from her bag. Before I left Whitmore Hall, my father signed control of his business accounts to me. It was not entirely true. The document only permitted Eleanor to review the accounts during his illness. But Pembroke did not know that. I found records of every loan you obtained using false property guarantees. I found the payments you made to gambling houses in 3 cities. I also found letters proving that you bribed an official to hide your debts. Pembroke's face lost its color. If I do not return safely, Captain Hale will deliver copies to the royal court. Captain Hale and 4 of the Duke's guards emerged from the trail. Pembroke looked around. His own men slowly lowered their weapons. They had agreed to intimidate a mountain man. They had not agreed to hang for attacking a noblewoman in front of official witnesses. Pembroke pointed the pistol at Eleanor. You lying, ungrateful. Silas moved before anyone else. He crossed the distance between them and struck Pembroke's wrist. The pistol fired into the air. A moment later, Pembroke was on the ground. Captain Hale placed him under arrest. When the riders finally disappeared down the mountain, Eleanor and Silas stood beside the burning remains of the barn. Silas touched the blood near his forehead. You should not have come. You are welcome. I was not thanking you. I know. His gaze hardened. Pembroke could have killed you. He could have killed you. That would have been my concern. And you are mine. Silas became silent. Eleanor reached into her bag and removed the copy of the land agreement. Did my father give you this property in exchange for taking me? Silas looked at the document. He offered it. You told me you expected nothing. I refused the deed. Captain Hale said he delivered it. He did. Silas entered the cabin and returned with a metal box. Inside was the original deed, unsigned. I planned to return it when the pass opened. Why did you not tell me? Because you already believed your father had discarded you. I did not want you thinking your presence here was connected to land or money. Eleanor's anger faded, replaced by another pain. Why did you let me leave without telling me how you felt? Silas looked away. You had a life before these mountains. It was not a life I wanted. You deserved the freedom to choose. I chose months ago. His eyes returned to hers. Eleanor stepped closer. I kept waiting for you to ask me to stay. I wanted to. Then why did you not? Silas swallowed. Because every man in your life had tried to control you. Your father chose where you lived. Pembroke tried to choose whom you married. I would not become another man placing his wishes above yours. You would not have been controlling me by telling me the truth. The truth was that I loved you enough to let you go. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, and I love you enough to come back. Silas stared at her as though afraid the words might disappear. She placed his hand against her cheek. I do not need a duke's estate. I do not need a noble title, but I need honesty. You have it. I need respect. You will always have it. And I need you to understand that I am not here because I have nowhere else to go. Silas moved closer. Why are you here? Because this is where I am loved. Silas kissed her carefully, as though she were something precious, rather than something he had been given. Eleanor wrapped her arms around him and kissed him again, with far less caution. They married at the beginning of summer. There was no grand ballroom, no noble guests, no orchestra. The ceremony took place beneath the pine trees, with Captain Hale and Clara serving as witnesses. Eleanor wore the blue dress she had sewn in the cabin. Silas wore a clean white shirt and looked more nervous than he had while facing 12 armed men, Afterward, they rebuilt the barn together. Using Eleanor's savings, they expanded the cabin and opened a trading post for families living beyond the northern pass. Eleanor managed the accounts. Silas handled the hunting, building, and transport. Within 3 years, their trading post became the most successful business in the region. Travelers who had once feared the mountain man came to trust him. Families who had once mocked Eleanor's appearance began sending letters requesting financial advice. She answered some. She burned others. When the Duke of Whitmore died, he left the estate to a distant cousin. Eleanor did not contest the decision. She had already inherited something far more valuable than land. She had inherited her own life. Years later, a traveler asked Silas why he had married a noblewoman who had been sent to him as punishment. Silas looked across the room. Eleanor was sitting near the fire, reading aloud while their 2 children listened beside her. She was older now. Her body was still soft and full. Her laughter was still loud. And when she noticed Silas watching, she smiled in the same way she had smiled after burning her first loaf of bread. Silas turned back to the traveler. "She was never the punishment," he said. "She was the only good thing her father ever gave away." Eleanor heard him. She closed her book and shook her head. "I was not given to you, Silas Grayson." Silas smiled. "No, you certainly were not." She held out her hand. "I chose you." He crossed the room and took it. Outside, winter snow covered the mountain trail where Eleanor had once been abandoned. But inside the cabin, the fire burned brightly, and the woman who had been told all her life that she was too much had finally found a place where she never needed to make herself smaller.